Two senior members of the royal family, named in the Dutch version of Omid Scobie's book as being the people at the centre of a racism row, have now been named publicly here in the UK. The publisher of Endgame said it was a translation error and has pulled all copies from the shelves in the Netherlands. But our very own Piers decided to announce the printed names on his TalkTV show last night.
I don't believe any racist comments were ever made by any of the royal family, and until there is actual evidence of those comments being made, I will never believe it. But now we can start the process of finding out if they ever got uttered, what the context was, and whether there was any racial intent at all. Like I say, I don't believe there was. The royals who are named in this book are King Charles and Catherine, Princess of Wales.
Omid Scobie, the author, has denied any involvement in the names being exposed. And speaking on ITV's This Morning earlier today, he said he's frustrated and has no idea how the printing error happened.
It does feel like a stunt to sell books, which I understand.
I wish it was the case.
Okay, how did it happen?
It's still being investigated right now.
What do you think happened?
I wrote and edited the English version of the book with one publisher. That then gets licensed to other publishers. I obviously can't speak Italian, German, French, Dutch, or any of the other languages that come out. I had never submitted a book that had their names in it, so I can only talk about my version.
Yeah.
I'm obviously frustrated. I wouldn't say I'm upset about it, because, to be honest, I've been operating in a bubble of no emotion for the last 10 days. But I am frustrated about it, just like I am many of the other things that I've seen written or said about the book.
Let's remind ourselves of exactly how we got here in the first place. The so-called royal racist row emerged after Meghan and Harry's infamous interview with Oprah Winfrey. That was way back in 2021. In that explosive sit-down, she recalled concerns being raised about the skin colour of their first child, Archie.
And also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What? About how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Hold up.
There's
Stop
several
right now.
There's several conversations.
There's a
about
conversation with you?
With Harry.
Those comments prompted global headlines and raised questions about discrimination within the royal family, claims that Buckingham Palace have always strongly denied. But almost 2 years later, Prince Harry gave a solo interview to ITV where he denied that he or Meghan ever called the royal family racist.
In the Oprah interview, you accuse members of your family of racism. You don't even...
We didn't.
Well, of...
The British press said that.
Right.
Did Meghan ever mention that they're racist?
She said there were troubling comments about
There was concern about his skin colour.
Right. Wouldn't you describe that as essentially racist?
I wouldn't, not having lived within that family.
Joining me now is royal commentator Emily Andrews and also the host of the To Die For daily podcast, Kinsey Schofield. Welcome both of you to the programme. My gosh, there is a fuss and furore about all of this, isn't there, really? I mean, I think I'll start with you, Emily, and really ask you, how did we get here? Because this is all way back in history. Harry writes his book Spare. It sells millions of copies all over the world. It's a huge success. He doesn't even refer to this incident. Then when he's asked by Bradby, is there racism within the royal family? Did you say there was? He says no. And so what's happening now?
And indeed, when Harry and Meghan did all their filming for that 6-part Netflix documentary that we were just sitting down to watch this time last year, there was no mention in there. Earlier this year, it was The Telegraph, actually, who wrote a story that Meghan and Charles had exchanged letters. And in these letters, Meghan had talked about unconscious bias and talked about these conversations about the concerns over Archie's skin colour. Now, this was after the Oprah Winfrey interview in March 2021, so we can infer that the exchange of letters was round about summer 2021. I understand that there was some kind of agreement or that there was a cordial exchange of letters between Meghan and Charles, and that she and Harry agreed not to raise it again. Potentially that's why we didn't have any comment or conversation about it in the Netflix documentary in Spare. Yes, as that clip just showed, Harry was picked up on it by Tom Bradbury. I mean, I think Tom Bradbury's jaw slightly, dropped open, as well as all of ours did, when Harry said that wasn't a racist. He wasn't accusing the royal family of racism. It was unconscious bias. But now, of course, in Omid's book, it has been raised again. He has said that he wanted to know exactly why Harry and Meghan didn't talk about it in the Netflix documentary, Harry didn't talk about it in his book, and that's why he included it in his book. But I have to say, the question for me, Vanessa, is where did this information come from? Because it certainly didn't come from Buckingham Palace.
Well, I would like to know, how did Omid Scobie have access to the letter or see it? How did he know who the two people supposedly, allegedly referred to within this private letter between Meghan and the King? How did he know who they were? Who told him?
Well, exactly. And I think my personal opinion is that it probably came from people around Meghan and Harry, because certainly after the publication of Omid's and Carolyn Durand's first book, Finding Freedom, shall we say that there was a bit of a froideur around the courtiers at Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, and I don't think they were exactly picking up the phone to him. We don't know where this came from. We don't know if Omid's even seen the letter. We don't even know whether these two names are correct. There's some suggestion that they're not. And I think when you're talking about something as incendiary as race, I mean, in our current society, I don't think there's anything more heinous than to accuse someone else of racism. We don't know the context. We don't know what these conversations were. And not that I'm excusing any kind of questioning about someone's skin colour, but again, Meghan also wasn't there. As Harry himself said, Meghan makes that initial sort of confession to Oprah and she's horrified. But then Harry joins them later and Harry says, well, actually, it was said to me it was before Archie was born and I'm never going to share who was in those conversations because it would be too damaging for them. So why is it being shared now?
Let me bring Kinsey into this conversation. Kinsey, obviously you discuss this kind of thing on your podcast every day. I bet you're as surprised as we are on this side of the pond that this has erupted again and in this incredibly confusing and bizarre way, with a revelation in a Dutch version of the book. The book's all now being pulped in the Netherlands. The author of the book saying he knows nothing about it. He did not include this in the book. I'm waiting for somebody to find the translator or the publisher in the Netherlands, and it would be astounding for a translator to insert something so incendiary from his or her own imagination, wouldn't it?
That's right. And just to reiterate, we don't know if these two names are the names, because Meghan only said that there was one individual. We don't know if either one of those names are the one that Meghan Markle was discussing in the Oprah Winfrey interview. Also, throughout this process, keep in mind that Meghan has said within the Netflix series, and Prince Harry has spoken about in Spare, he says that Meghan has educated him a lot on racism and the idea of unconscious bias. So perhaps he heard something that was innocent and not, there was no malice behind it, but through the game of telephone, it became something, that sounded much more sinister. I don't know. But how does this end up in a book? That is one of the most expensive mistakes a publisher could make. Endgame has been a highly hyped book. It was postponed initially. So not only was it postponed, but you have to imagine the kind of marketing and just preparation that goes into a highly anticipated book like this, it being dubbed as Spare 2.0. So to make an error like this, to have to hold the book, to have to reprint the book, that's an incredibly expensive mistake. And I can't imagine that multiple eyes didn't go over it.
Unless, Emily Andrews, it wasn't a mistake at all. This is only a suggestion. I know it's a conspiracy theory, but I mean, we're allowed theories when something as bizarre and mind-boggling as this occurs, unless it was some kind of lost leader, unless it was decided to include it somehow in the Dutch version and then say, gosh, we didn't know it was in there, and then pulp a few books and then get literal hype around every single corner and crevice of the universe.
Well, I am always a subscriber to the cock-up, not conspiracy theory. And I don't think this was conspiracy. I don't think that this was a deliberate attempt to get round English defamation or British defamation laws, because obviously to accuse someone of being racist or indeed unconscious bias, really, I think is probably quite a strong libel and or slander in all form. And so I think, and actually I was just going through, I know you've read the book as well, Vanessa, but I was just going through my copy earlier and I was going through the acknowledgements. And in the acknowledgements, Omid thanks a number of people, particularly at HarperCollins, the publisher, and says in particular to a number of 3 or 4 ladies, and in brackets, particularly with those insane translation times, which I take to mean that they were having to be translated very, very quickly, the deadlines, the books. And when things, when we're all under pressure, things can slip through the net.
Yes, but you can't translate something that's not there. And he says he didn't write it. So if you're a translator, Kinsey, you don't make it up yourself. You don't insert names that aren't in the original manuscript. And if you thought, well, I wonder who this is, I wonder whether we should elucidate, maybe we should put the names in, you wouldn't know the names unless the author gave you the names. How could you possibly put it in if you didn't know what it was?
And my issue with his this morning interview was that he wasn't asked, well, you've said you know who this is, but you can't say. Can you tell us that it's not these 2 individuals? Because if it's not these 2 individuals, then there's an element of innocence, that his hands are clean. If those names are wrong, then I feel like there's less guilt that hovers over him. I wish they would have asked him that. I wish he would have said, that's not even who it is. But the idea that we're left again with a question mark over everyone's head, I believe it's such an unfair position for the royal family to be in.
Let's talk a little bit about the content of the book, Emily. I've read it. It's been, what can you say, crucified, mauled. It's been absolutely savaged by the critics. And I wonder whether you agree with most of them. Certainly, I haven't seen it. Barely a positive word have I seen about it. I wonder whether you agree with them, Emily, and if you do, why you think the reaction has been so feverishly hostile to this book.
Well, what should I think of the book? I thought some of it was very interesting. I don't think anyone can, well, from my personal point of view, I don't think anyone can argue with talking about race at the top of one of our British institutions. And this, by the way, is not the way to do it, to put names into the public domain, in my opinion. But there's no, I think, to examine the future of the monarchy and to examine where it goes after the death of Queen Elizabeth. And Omid makes some points and tells some stories that I do agree with. Having said that, I don't agree with his thesis in general that it's going to be the end of the monarchy down to Charles. I mean, I wrote a piece myself, I think like 8 years ago about that, and the palace were very angry with me. And it's something that you write while Queen Elizabeth, long-serving monarch, is still on the throne. For me, this book feels about 2 years out of date. And Omid himself says that he started writing it when Queen Elizabeth was, with all due respect to her, an aging monarch, and Charles was still waiting at the age of 71, 72, 73, still to take the throne. It feels to me 2 years out of date, because actually Charles has ascended, he's doing very well. People are either, quite supportive of him or just kind of just indifferent. Yeah, it's fine. He's doing a good job. He's at COP today in Dubai. He's still managing to pursue that environmental agenda, which many, many people do support, while still being our head of state. He's doing a very good job. Incoming state visit from the President of Korea. Most people, I think that he is doing a good job. Omid makes a good point about the youth and young people not being so engaged in the royals. But 'twas ever thus, Vanessa.
Yeah.
When I was in my teens,
let me bring Kinsey into this, because Kinsey, you're hugely successful with this daily podcast about the British royal family. You know, it obviously has colossal appeal across the Atlantic. So I wonder whether you in any way buy into Omid Scobie's thesis that the monarchy is really for the chop, they're past their sell-by date, they're elitist, they're old-fashioned, they're privileged in a way that's unrelatable, they're very, very mixed up in terms of their personalities and their psychological makeup, there are all sorts of different warfare inside the royal family. You know, his thesis is pretty pernicious if you're someone who's a monarchist and an enthusiast about the royal family. Do you think he's right, that the writing's on the wall for the royal family?
I mean, I think that Emily would agree with me that the Prince and Princess of Wales in recent months, maybe even the last 12 months, have added a new sense of excitement to the British royal family. There is something that is very sexy about the couple, endearing about the couple. They seem very in love. I love when I catch them whispering, looking at each other, flirting. I mean, those are the types of things that keep me engaged, and I think, you know, are of interest to a younger demographic. There is a happily ever after, a fairy tale element to Prince William and Kate. And so I don't agree with Omid Scobie. I think that there is interest from a younger demo, and it's growing due to the Prince and Princess of Wales.
And it's quite interesting because he writes a lot about how if you put Kate on the cover of a magazine, if you put her on the cover of a book, if you put her on the cover of a paper, she sells because she looks gorgeous, she looks stunningly glamorous, but somehow also relatable. Even though she's taller, thinner and more gorgeous than most people could ever dream of being, you still can't help seeing her as somebody that is within aspiration. I'm not sure how she does it. Quite amazing. He writes about that, but at the same time, very contemptuously of Kate, you know, it being almost a cardboard cutout, a shiny thing. Very contemptuous, I think, and misogynistic to call a woman a thing, but, you know, a shiny thing that the royal family can kind of rock out. Somebody who's biddable, coachable, has no personality, does what she's told to do, is fearful. So while acknowledging her colossal pulling power and selling power, he denigrates her and criticises her at the very same time. Final word on that, Emily, because unfortunately we've got to conclude the conversation.
I totally agree, and I think it's hypocritical that he lauds the late Queen Elizabeth II for all those qualities of steadfast duty, tradition, which is exactly what we see from Kate, but criticises her for it. And if anyone said that about Meghan, he'd be first to call sexist.
Thank you both very much indeed. It's really fascinating, this story. Thank you so much.